Hello, welcome to a briefing on Riskline's 2022 forecast. I'm your host Jan Sieber, and Riskline is a travel risk intelligence company that provides country and city risk assessments, as well as real-time alerting capabilities to fulfill duty of care requirements before and during travel. Trusted by global travel management companies, small businesses, and everyone in between, Riskline operates as a geographically distributed team in over 15 countries and across 11 different time zones. In recent decades, many countries have seen the effects of catastrophic wildfires and floods, resulting in fatalities and damages on an unprecedented scale. Climate change is driving extreme weather events, testing the limits of emergency readiness and infrastructure. The scale of floods and wildfires, as well as increasingly brutal heat waves, are expected to accelerate the already ongoing phenomenon of climate migration and render some areas permanently uninhabitable. Meeting the disruptions caused by extreme weather events will require a more ambitious plan against climate change, as well as adaptive infrastructure and boosting emergency services to withstand the effect of future natural disasters, all aspects which were discussed as the COP22 proceeded in Glasgow. Despite ongoing vaccination efforts, the impact of COVID-19 will persist well beyond 2021. Israel and several other countries with high vaccination coverage have seen surges in COVID-19 cases, even higher than 2020 levels. This shows that a complete return to pre-pandemic life is unlikely. Instead, education, work, and other aspects of public life will continue operating in hybrid mode. Wary of reimposing sweeping lockdowns, governments will rely on encouraging booster shots, distancing, and restricting public life for unvaccinated individuals as mitigating measures. Hospitality and travel industries are expected to be the hardest hit by the uncertainties of the hybrid world. Transitioning back to a pre-pandemic state will entail a continuing of vaccination efforts. This includes the expanding vaccine access in developing countries, as well as combating misinformation and the backlash against health measures that we've seen recently. Predictions that political polarization will thin off with the electoral losses of President Trump and his Republican Party, as well as the drawing down of COVID-19 restrictions, have proven overly optimistic. Despite its losses in 2020, the GOP is even more under the control of the former president and its allies. In France, the long-anticipated rematch between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen for the French presidency in 2022 is no longer a sure thing. Far-right essayist Eric Zemmour is polling neck and neck with Le Pen for second place in the polls. A significant resumption of public health restrictions or new Islamist terrorist attacks could cost Macron his base for support and fire up the right-wing opposition. In Brazil, the polarization of the society is likely to increase ahead of October 2022 and the general election, with mass demonstrations likely in urban hubs across the country. Incumbent far-right President Jair Bolsonaro is facing an uphill battle for re-election. Protests against COVID-19 vaccination, as well as vaccine supply and distribution issues in relatively less wealthy countries, will continue into 2022. Vaccination has proven instrumental in significantly reducing deaths and severe symptoms, as well as keeping case numbers low. However, backlash against government vaccination mandates has resulted in mass protests worldwide. While some countries struggle to overcome a vaccine hesitancy, others are seeing the difficulties in securing and delivering vaccine. A striking fact is that over 85% of people living in Africa are still waiting for their first dose. Global vaccination rates will likely pick up as vaccine manufacturers plan to increase production and wealthier countries donate excess vaccines. However, the fact that the vast majority of the population is not vaccinated against COVID-19 in some countries will mean that restrictions on travel to and from those countries will be maintained in the near term. The mobilization of scientific resources by government, regulators, and pharmaceutical companies delivered safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines to the world in little under a year. While this was an unprecedented public health triumph, it also demonstrates a number of major risks going forward into future health crises. The pandemic has exposed serious fault lines within societies, particularly Western democracies, as right-wing populism birthed a very vocal politics of defiance against public health measures, especially in the US and Australia. International cooperation on infectious diseases also suffered, despite the global public-private partnerships to develop these vaccines. Effectively managing a future pandemic will require rebuilding trust and cooperation between countries, as well as between public health officials and the general public they represent. In 2022, the security environment between the borders of Iran, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan with their Afghan neighbor will remain challenging and unpredictable. Central Asian governmental efforts, except for Tajikistan, to build diplomatic and intelligence sharing relationships with the Taliban are unlikely to prevent possible cross-border attacks, the flow of suspected terrorists, or the export of extremism. Nearby India faces threats from both Hindu and Islamist extremism. A similar tense environment exists in Sri Lanka, where the government has been criticized for its Prevention of Terrorism Act. Counter-terrorism raids and arrests have increased nationwide following a large-scale militant attacks in 2019 targeting 3 different churches. There is a 72% chance that 2022 will be warmer than previous years. The heat will worsen drought conditions across the Middle East and North Africa, this being the world's most water insecure region, which has access to only 1.4% of the world's freshwater supplies. The lack of water is already impacting farming, which accounts for 80% of consumption in the region, leading to food shortages in many countries. The problem is further compounded as water facilities are targeting in ongoing internal conflicts, leaving governments unable to treat and deliver water to the public. This water crisis has garnered more attention from the public and the governments in the regions in recent years. However, very little has been done to reduce water waste, expand water and treatment infrastructure, or resolve the conflicts at the root of the issue. Several conflicts in Africa took on new dimensions in 2021, and they are likely to continue unabated through 2022. In June, the separatist Tigray Defense Forces retook Mekelle, the Tigray regional capital. Emboldened by their success, Tigrayan forces proceeded to advance into the Amhara and Afar regions. The Sahel region also continues to be plagued by insecurity and instability, with domestic and international security forces unable to stem the flow of violence from jihadists and other armed militant groups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. While military coups used to be the norm in Africa between 1950 and 2000, the trend of military leaders seizing powers slowed in the following 2 decades. However, 4 coups occurred in 2021 alone, with new leaders overthrowing governments in Mali, Chad, Guinea, and Sudan. The African Union and the rest of the international community condemned such acts. However, military strongmen have acted with impunity to take power from leader with such questionable legitimacy. An increase in crime, such as attacks on security personnel, kidnaps for ransoms, are expected to continue in developing and semi-developed countries after seeing a rise in 2020-2021 amid the fallout from the pandemic. Increased crime rates can be linked to a number of factors summed up in governmental impotence in providing or exhibiting any form of security and stability. The severe impact the pandemic has had on subsistence lifestyles worldwide is profound and will continue to unevenly affect those of lower economic status in 2022. This sustained trend will likely continue in the new year, with organized criminal groups coming into increasingly deadly conflict with security forces. The African continent has some of the lowest vaccination rates, weakest healthcare systems, and most fragile economies in the world. The impact of COVID-19 has created unsustainable living conditions for millions, especially those who are already facing ongoing conflicts within their communities. Additionally, COVID-19 resulted in the slashing of many aid budgets, leaving many with no choice but to attempt the perilous and lengthy migration routes through North Africa and into Europe. For those already on migration routes, the impact of COVID-19 deaths and hospitalizations on refugee and migrant populations, whether this be in camps or en route, has not been reported. Rather, tightened border restrictions and the use of COVID-19 as an excuse to reduce asylum intake in European countries has had a significantly greater impact on the migrant journey. Even after economic conditions improve, the growing tide of anti-refugee sentiment in Europe will see public health measures to limit arrivals maintained. On that note, I'd like to thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Riskline or schedule a demo of our travel risk intelligence solutions, feel free to get in touch via contact@riskline.com or at riskline.com.